I'd like to call to order the October 14th, 2020 meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Ms. Parman, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
And Mr. Rodley may join us later.
First order of business are the minutes from our September 9th meeting. Are there any changes, additions, deletions to the minutes? Okay, the minutes stand approved. Our next order of business are public hearings. Our first case is for 4041 Bradshaw Ordinary.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner. The applicant for CBPA 20-0092 at 4041 Bradshaw Ordinary has requested a deferral for this case, and should the board wish to accept this deferral, it will move to the next month.
Any reason to not to defer this case? Okay. Do we need a motion on that? Would
Yes,
someone like to
please.
make a motion to defer the case?
I motion to defer Chesapeake Bay Board case Charlie Bravo Papa Alpha 20 Tech 0092 at 4041 Bradshaw Ordinary.
Mr. Waltrip?
Roll call?
No, this is a motion to defer the first case, 4041 Bradshaw Ordinary.
Do we have to vote on that?
You do, and actually, Mr. Rodley, I'm going to leave you off of this vote since you just joined us, but the next hearings will include you. So, Mr. Waltrip? Yes. Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, and
Okay,
Mr.
the
Mr. Rodley has joined the meeting.
Okay, the motion carries, and that case is deferred till next month. Our next case is 8810 Pocahontas Trail.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, James City County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 20-0091. Ms. Maria Guavin, Gibson Heritage Community LLC, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a mobile home on property located at 8810-35B, Pocahontas Trail within the Skiffs Creek watershed. Parcel was platted prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. A recent fire demolished a mobile home previously located on the property. The applicant is proposing to install in place a new 14-foot by 56-foot mobile home in place of the previous mobile home, equating to a total of 784 square feet of impervious surface within the RPA. Mitigation for this amount of impervious impact equates to 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs. If the applicant decides there is no room on the property to perform the required amounts of mitigation, the applicant may pay into the Chesapeake Bay Mitigation Fund in the amount of $1,000. Staff has evaluated the application and exception requests for the construction and installation of a mobile home. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the mobile home is not considered, the installation of this mobile home is not considered reconstruction as the former structure was completely destroyed. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels. And reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that the request does meet all 5 of the conditions as presented above, and staff recommends approval of this. Should the board find that the exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above as well, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. A mitigation plan equating to the plantings of 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division, or the payment of $1,000 be paid into the Chesapeake Bay Mitigation Fund. A surety of $1,000 be paid in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office if the planting mitigation is chosen above. The exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by October 14th, 2021. Written request for an extension to this exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 2nd, 2021, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Now, divert your attention for a small presentation. Again, the applicant request is to install and construct a mobile home on property located at 8810 35B Pocahontas Trail, outlined here in blue in the vicinity map. 2017 aerial photographs show the previous mobile home recently destroyed by the fire as it's situated on this property. In 2019, photographs showing the destruction and removal of this mobile home. Topography indicating fairly flat and then sloping off down towards the resource as it is shown above here in red. Site plan has been submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. The proposed mobile home to be installed here in yellow, and the 100-foot resource protection area dashed here in red. A couple of site photos that we've taken. So looking back from the front of the property towards the area of proposed construction, a side angle. Again, staff does recommend approval of this permit exception request, given that the following conditions are required. All other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required as needed. That a mitigation plan of 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs be submitted, or the payment of $1,000 to the Chesapeake Bay Mitigation Fund if there's no room to perform the plantings. That a surety of $1,000 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office if the vegetative mitigation route is not chosen. And this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by October 14th, 2021, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than September 2nd, 2021, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have at this time.
I just want to make sure I understand something. If this were not a mobile home and it was a regular construction and it burned down, would they have to come to us to get a permit if they were rebuilding in the same footprint?
Yes, sir. Yes. The reason this is here before the board tonight is because there's nothing left to consider reconstruction of, because it was completely removed and taken off. It now must come back to the board.
Okay. What if it was a regular house and it was just the foundation was left? Would they need a permit?
The foundation would make it reconstruction because there's still impervious surface there, but you're right, because this is a mobile home and there was no foundation, there is nothing left to consider reconstruction.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand how we're treating this differently from a regular
Yes, sir.
home. Okay, I think that answered my question. Any other questions for staff? Okay, at this time I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board? Okay. Would anyone else like to address the board on this issue? Okay, please come forward and state your name. is that for this case?
Yes.
Yeah, we got to finish with this one first, and then you'll be welcome to come forward. But we got to wrap some other ones up first. Would anyone else like to address the board on this issue? Okay, at this time, I'll close the public hearing. Discussion from the board.
We vote to approve this application.
Before we vote on it, I was asking the question about, if it was a regular house and it burned down, and the house had a fire and they had the foundation was left, then they could just go ahead and they wouldn't have to come in front of us and they could just build. So in a little bit of a way, we're treating a mobile home more severely because it doesn't have a foundation and it's, then they, when it burned, there's nothing left, so they have to come in and get the permit, where there's a regular house, wouldn't have had to get a permit. And, I'm in favor of granting the permit, but I'm also, I feel a lot of sympathy if it, the house burned down. This is a pretty flat lot. I think we could waive the, the $1,000 mitigation requirements if they don't want to, if they don't want to do the plannings. I mean, their house burned down. I think we can be sympathetic, because if it was a normal house, they wouldn't have to do the replannings too. I think we should sort of.
There's a hardship on them, and couldn't single out.
Probably, when the law was passed in the regs, the, legislatures never thought of, they never thought of these little exceptions that come up, and that's our prerogative to consider that. If
Add that to the motion?
yeah, it would be okay to waive the, the $1,000 payment to the mitigation fund if the applicant desires. If they want to pay it, fine, but in a hardship like this, okay, so we have a motion to approve with the addition that the mitigation fee may be waived. If they are welcome to do the plannings, but if they opt not to, it's not a requirement. Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip? Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Our next case is 2509 Goodrich Durfee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 20-0088. Mr. John Blankenship has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a patio and fire pit on property located at 2509 Goodrich Durfee within the College Creek watershed. The property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel number 4840200068, and this parcel was platted in 1991 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990 and before the change to conservation revisions in 2004. Total lot size of this property is 0.46 acres, of which 38% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to construct a 20-foot by 24-foot patio and fire pit within the landward 50-foot RPA. Required amount of mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equates to the plantings of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. Staff has evaluated the application and exception requests for the construction of a fire pit and patio. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the patio is accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 Chesapeake Bay preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from the conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that the request does meet all 5 of the conditions as presented above. Should the board also find the exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. A mitigation plan equating to the plantings of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. A surety of $250 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by October 14th, 2021, and written requests for an extension to this exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 2nd, 2021, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Brief presentation above. Again, the applicant is requesting to construct a patio and fire pit on property located at 2509 Goodrich Durfee, then the College Creek watershed. Parcel outlines here in blue. Aerial photograph showing the property and the approximate location of the project. Topography as it slopes off towards the lake here. And the resource protection area as it affects this property coming directly to the edge of the house in the area of the property of the project location. And the site plan here above with the 100-foot resource protection area outlined here in red and the proposed patio and fire pit in yellow. A couple site photographs from the project location. Again, staff recommends approval of this, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required as necessary, that a mitigation plan equating to the plantings of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division, that a surety of $250 be paid in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office, and that this exception request approval become null and void if construction has not begun by October 14th, 2021, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than September 2nd, 2021. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time.
Any questions for staff? Hey, this time I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board? No, come on up. And it'll be noted in the records that you were here. And just state your name for the.
John Blankenship.
Okay.
And,
Have any comments for us?
I think Mr. Long summarized it pretty well.
Any questions from the board for the applicant? Okay, thank you for coming out. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion among the board?
Chairman, rather minimal impact to that area that's already cleared. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0088 at 2509 Goodrich Durfee.
Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes,
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
motion carries. Next case is 2425 Mannion Drive. Mr. Wilson?
Evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mike Wilson here, Senior Watershed Planner. I'm here to present case CBPA 20-0094, Mr. Dennis and Ms. Jennifer Organ at 2425 Mannion Drive. What they're wanting to do is to construct a dock house and a patio. Mr. Alan Parker of Alan Parker Builders has applied for Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of the Organs for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a dock house and patio on property located at 2425 Mannion Drive within the James River watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel 46301-00002. Parcel was platted prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance in 1990. Parcel's located here within the Drummondsfield subdivision, directly upon the James River. Total lot size for this property is 10.28 acres, of which 16% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to construct a dock house and patio equating to 336 square feet of impervious area in the landward 50-foot RPA. Previous dwelling and dock house and a dock house at the Toa Slope were removed from the property in 2015 with 2 foundation walls remaining. It is these 2 walls that are situated within the hillside of the property that the applicants propose to situate the dock house and patio in between. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impact within the RPA equals 1 planting unit. They are proposing 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs, which is more than is required. From the aerial photograph, 2013 clearly shows a house here, and then down on this slope in this area, there was another structure that has been removed. 2019, the structure at the base of the slope is removed and the house has been removed. There are foundation walls from the old, from the former house, and what I can presume was a walkout basement area. It is this area that they are proposing to reuse. Sits at the top of the slope. The topography of the site goes down 20 plus feet down to the James River, similar to other properties in this area of the county. There is a current house under construction. The house under construction is in this area, in this open area, outside of the RPA. The RPA, as it affects this property, clearly impacts where the old house was, or the old house impacts the RPA. From the plan submitted, a 12 by 14 structure here, and then 12 by 14 patio with a fire pit. Retaining wall would be over here, and then another proposed dock house and then the proposed patio. Photographs of the site showing those two walls that were associated with the former house. Dock house and patio would be in this area. View from the river, looking back towards structure. Here you can see the current house under construction in the background. Staff evaluated this application and the exception request for the construction of a dock house and patio. The application does meet the ordinance requirements in sections 2311 and 2314 and should be heard before this board because the dock house and patio are considered accessory in nature and are proposed to be located within the RPA. Board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. That the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not a substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels. And number 5, reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does meet all 5 of the conditions as presented above and is approvable. Should the board find that the exception request meets all 5 of those conditions, staff does suggest the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. A mitigation plan equating to the planting of 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater Resource Protection Division. That a surety of $1,000 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the county attorney. That the exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by October 14, 2021. And that written request for extensions to the exception shall be submitted to our division no later than September 2nd, 2021, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this application.
I have a question. I want to make sure I'm clear on this because I think I was a little confused when I read through it initially. So the house that's being built, totally out of the RPA.
Correct.
Okay. And so there was a house and the dock house that were in the RPA, and they're both gone now. And the new dock house is not going to be built on the site of the old dock house. It's going to be built on the site of the house.
Correct.
Oh, okay. And just
The former house.
of the former house that's gone. Okay.
Correct.
And you have any approximate idea of the house that was removed and the dock house that were removed? Was their square footage must have been a lot more than
It was significantly more than what is being proposed.
okay. All right.
And I'll point that out in the aerial photograph from 2013. Although I don't have the RPA on here, the RPA came up to at least halfway through the house. With the retaining walls or foundation walls being in this location. And my guess, although I don't know, my guess is it was a walkout basement type scenario. It's what makes sense looking at the site under today's conditions. So they're asking for 336 square feet in here. Approximately 100 to 150 square feet was removed down by the river, plus, and I don't have the figure in front of me, and I apologize, but I would say it's about 1,000 square feet, if not more, was removed when the house was removed.
All right, thanks. That answers my question. Any other questions for?
Is that patio step down halfway to the water, or is it coming out level with the original where the house is? How much area lengthwise on the property on the water is being covered, or is it just a small area where the patio is going? How about the rest of the property that's eroding and stuff? Is that included in that?
There are no other proposals at this time for shoreline work. That may happen in the future. There is a bulkhead and I believe there's an existing bulkhead on the property, and I believe the owner is looking to either replace that in the future or take it out and do some other types of treatment. There has been a dock permit talked about, and I believe it has been submitted. That permit would not come before the Wetlands Board because it's an open pile structure that's outside the Wetlands Board jurisdiction.
I think there's been a lot of erosion on that area all along there for those homeowners that,
Further to the west, that is absolutely true, Mr. Waltrip.
my question is, again, is it a step down to a patio?
No, this is going to be up near the top of the slope.
So then you'll have steps going down to the water.
Correct. They're going to propose, and it hasn't come in yet.
That's
but
separate, okay.
But that will be an administrative approval for steps to access the dock from the patio.
Wilson, are there any water treatment associated with these impervious surfaces other than the proposed plantings?
No, sir.
Any other questions for staff? This time I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Hello, I'm Alan Parker, and I'm meeting for Dennis and Jen Oregon to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions?
Mr. Parker, I can see that there's been quite a bit of disturbance in this area in the past, and obviously the presence of a house with a larger footprint. One of the things that we look to help mitigate the impacts, in addition to or commensurate with the plantings, is means to control stormwater runoff that may leave that area. I haven't been to this site. Can you comment about the potential need for stormwater control for water leaving that impervious surface?
So currently, where we're planning to locate the dock house and the pavers would be exactly in the area that's currently flat where the walkout basement had existed. As you saw the walls, which are shown right now on the picture in the overhead. Essentially, that area right there is tucked in and tight to the hillside. Right above it is the flat of the 10.5 acres that rolls out across, and I'm constructing a home right now outside of the RPA for the Oregons. In order to utilize the property, for which they want, this is all the way over to the side of the property where this particular element was. So they didn't want to go into and disturb any other undisturbed areas, which would be the vista behind their dwelling, their house. So this was already there, so they wanted to utilize this particular area since it was already cleared, so they wouldn't have to clear anything because it's more of a gradual slope, which then the dock could continue running on up for any steps that were needed to carry them down. This gave them another area that they could sit and enjoy the dock without having to be over at the house, because a lot of people want to have their dock and their dock house and stuff more directly behind their dwelling. This is being placed all the way over to the side of the lot so as to not have to disturb any other further areas, trying to help to meet the needs and wants of the Chesapeake Bay regulations. As far as any amount of mitigation required to surface for the runoff, as in a BMP, such as a trench-style BMP or anything, there's nothing proposed, but I have no problem if you would like to put in a small BMP trench on the water side of that would carry across that, a modest one, because I don't think for this size of impervious area that we would need to have such a large BMP like I've created before in many of the cases when I've built in areas across the peninsula. So I don't mind doing, an infiltration trench that we could put on the seaward side and run it parallel to the dwelling, and of course, then we would come across it with the steps and stuff, but it would still be there to catch any runoff. There's still plenty of land between, because we're up on the landward side, and plenty of infiltration area to go down into that area, so it would never reach the water anyway. It's such a minute amount of runoff that would occur there. I don't think it would have any impact on this. Mr. Oregon has already planted probably well over 200 trees on the property since we've already come in there. He got a little anxious and started wanting to plant some trees, some border trees and things. So we'll continue to.
It's attractive to the eye. the problems don't usually pop up immediately. They pop up later when you're gone. And so I appreciate the offer to put a small infiltration basin.
Any other questions for the applicant? Please thank the owner for really putting a lot of thought, and you too, into this plan. It's really a good plan. And, you know, for pulling the house out and not just, you know, out of the RPA and you know, and really minimizing the disturbance in the RPA. It looks really good to me. This infiltration trench, do we need to acknowledge that in the permit in some way, or how do we deal with that in making a motion? You don't, you know, none of your documents have reflected.
Mr. Chair, the minutes will reflect that, and the surety that will be required will be in place to ensure that that's taken care of. If you want the resolution to specifically call that out, that's fine as well. But staff's comfortable with it being put into the minutes that way.
What's the thought of the board? Do we need to?
If satisfied, I'm satisfied.
Okay.
I'm sure that Mr. Wilson will make me behave, and we've been here before, and we did very well before you, so.
It looks like some thought ought to be put into this trench that you're talking about for future. If you're going to be going down to the water, this ought to work in harmony with that when the next phase goes in, because it will be another phase if you're only working at the top side.
Right, and I will only always be working on the top side. The rest of the story will come from whoever's building the dock, and then bringing that up the hill to meet this with any type of stairs.
It should be designed where it would work in harmony with whatever's going to be done.
Sure, and that's what we anticipate. The infiltration trench should be of little to no impact relative. If we do just a flat cover infiltration trench, then it's just a surface there that has mulch on top of it. That's what I was anticipating. So it will have no impact to what we do as far as bringing up any steps or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't see a need to, you know, lay it out in the resolution then. We'll leave it to the staff. Someone like to make a motion? Oh, wait. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Thank you for explaining that to us. Can we have a motion?
Motion to adopt a resolution to grant exception for Chesapeake Bay 2405 Mannion Drive.
Hey, Ms. Parman, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Okay, motion carries, exception is granted. Our next case is 20-0096, 289 Mill Stream Way.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA-20-0096. Mr. Aaron Williams, of Williams Landscaping Design, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Kevin and Ms. Tammy Potter for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a patio, 3 retaining walls, and steps with paver landings on property located at 289 Mill Stream Way within the Mill Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1995 prior to the 2004 changes to the ordinance. Total lot size of this property is 0.4 acres, of which 83% is located within the RPA. In June 2020, the applicants obtained an administrative exception to convert a deck into a house addition. The applicants are now proposing to construct a patio area adjacent to the addition. Patio area will be bordered by 2 retaining walls due to the natural slope of the property. In addition to the patio, the applicants have also proposed a series of steps, including paver landings in areas connected to the patio, driveway, and decking area. Adjacent to the patio is a 530 square foot paver area. There is also an additional 85 linear foot retaining wall proposed to the rear of the house addition. Total area of the patio, 2 retaining walls, paver area, and step structures equate to approximately 1,014 square feet of impervious surface. General mitigation amounts for this amount of impervious surface equate to the plantings of 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 8 shrubs. A mitigation plan has been submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division, of which meets and exceeds this requirement. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the proposed construction of a patio with steps and landings and 3 retaining walls. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the additions are considered necessary and accessory in nature and occur within the seaward 50-foot RPA. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request will not be based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels. And the reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception requests from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does not meet all 5 of the conditions presented above. Should the board, however, find the exception request does meet all 5 of the conditions above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. A mitigation plan equating to the plantings of 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 8 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. This condition has been met. And a surety of $1,500 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. And that this exception request approval become null and void if construction has not begun by October 14th, 2021, with written request for an extension submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 2nd, 2021. I'll now divert your attention to the board for a brief presentation. Again, the applicant requests is to construct a patio with 3 retaining walls, steps, and landings at 289 Millstream Way within the Millstream watershed and the property outlined here in blue. Aerial photograph of the property showing the approximate location of the project, the patio in particular. Topography, sloping back towards the rear of the property where the resource is contained and the RPA as it does affect this property. The site plan that has been submitted for this project, the proposed retaining wall here, proposed patio to be encapsulated by the retaining walls here, the other 2 retaining walls. The 100-foot resource protection area as it affects the property. The approximate edge of the wetlands that are on property. And the approximate center of the stream adjacent to the wetlands. And a conservation easement that is also located on property. And the mitigation plan that was submitted are the plantings here outlined in green. A couple site photographs shown here. This is the approximate location of the main patio beyond this driveway here. Looking back towards the rear of the property, this being the administrative alteration that occurred earlier this summer, and the retaining wall coming back here, and patio steps and landings here. A closer view of the retaining wall area and back towards the patio and steps area here. Another photo of the patio. Again, should the board wish to approve this project, the applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. Then a mitigation plan equating to the plantings of 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 8 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division, of which has been fulfilled. That a surety of $1,500 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. And this exception request approval become null and void if construction has not begun by October 14th, 2021, with written request for an extension submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than September 2nd, 2021, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Okay, I'd like to start off with the questions. Okay, I want to make sure I'm clear on a couple things with this one. So the staff is not, does not believe that all the 5 conditions that we're required to consider are being met in this case, right? You're not.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Normally, you guys tell us that all 5 conditions are met, but in this one, you can't go, you're not doing that. Can you pull up your photo that shows the backyard and go back one more.
One more? Yes, sir.
No, where that, I was really concerned about this one because there's a stream right at the bottom. We're not just talking about the RPA buffer. We're talking about there's an actual stream at the toe of this. Can you make out the stream is that the stream in the?
The stream's approximately right. This is the edge of the wetlands right here, right beyond this black silt fencing.
So that's the edge of the wetlands, right? We're not the RPA, but the wetlands are actually there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is different from most of the cases we're looking at. I mean, there's a stream. Is that a year-round stream or is it an ephemeral stream?
That stream is perennial.
So we have a perennial stream with wetlands right at the back of this. Okay, and they've they converted. They had a deck, and the deck was converted to part of the house. They added a room onto it, but we didn't vote on this, right? This was done administratively, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct. It was approved
Because
administratively.
I don't remember this coming before us before. Okay. All right. Those were my questions.
Trevor, was the condition of this, as we see it now, while the site's under construction, was that part of the evaluation process for the administrative exception? In terms of, was it just a silt fence boundary and then this is just area that was going to be disturbed during construction?
Yes, sir.
That silt fence between the big tree and the little tree to the left, is that a washout where the water's going?
I don't believe so. I think that's a glare from the photograph.
I was here this morning though, and there was a blowout. I mean, there's a bunch of sand that's deposited in the wetlands already that'll, regardless of what we do, I will have to be cleared out. I have a lot of concerns about this one because it's so close to the stream, and even if they do the plantings, I don't see how it's so close. How are they going to, even if you squeeze in plants and behind the wall, how are you going to possibly protect that stream? I think the runoff is going to just destroy that stream.
Ask you a question.
Sir.
We'll pick up the slide, the first slide, I think, that had the vinyl siding laying in it and looked like some construction debris. That's it. We want to pass to come back. Is this a planter here that's leaning over from due to erosion that's already taken place, or am I looking at this wrong? It looks to me like it's already tilted, like it's suffering from the bank side there is already moving toward.
That is correct. There is some erosion on the property that has altered already conforming structures that are occurring there, such as that planter. along with, there's this bed here. You can see
I'm safe in thinking that the only thing that's protecting the stream now is the silt fence.
yes, and this was vegetated prior to this this construction occurring here. So there was grass, if my reconciliation is correct. But currently, yes, the silt fence is protecting that stream.
You know, were these retaining walls previously approved by the board?
I'm unaware.
Had that slope pulled back and stabilized and used sod on it, would that sod do a halfway decent job to cut down on the erosion grass on it? To get a quick termination grass in there? Is that something that's thought about maybe for this project maybe?
It would certainly help. There would be vegetation that would hold soil.
Any other questions for the staff?
I just want to make sure I understood what you said at the beginning. So it was started as a deck, administratively approved, and then after the fact, it came back and they wanted to add this additional patio.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to open the public hearing. Is the applicant here? Please come forward. State your name.
Hi, my name's Aaron Williams, Williams Landscaping Design. I'm speaking on behalf of the homeowners, Kevin and Tammy Potter. Is it possible to pull up the drawing just by itself for a second? So a couple quick explanations. The retaining wall that we're suggesting, to your point, you saw where water gushes down that hill. Prior to them even doing the new addition that's back there, that had been an issue all along, is water just, it's going to go from high to low no matter what, and it's going like crazy. So our thought, even way before this addition was being put on, was build up, level out that area so that you don't have that amount of force coming down and control it, you know. So that was the reason for the wall, because I saw that a long time ago and thought, good gracious, if we could level that, that might help it. So that was the reason for it.
Let me ask you that. Wait, I want to make sure I'm really clear on this. The yellow wavy line, that's the retaining, that's a
Right.
retaining wall.
And the blue line is the stream, way back there. Isn't that
Wait,
right?
well, when you say way back there, I mean, how
that
many
the blue
feet is
line?
it from that?
Yeah, sorry.
Is the dotted green the extent of the wetlands?
Yeah. So there's both a stream and pocket wetlands scattered through here. So the stream is outlined here in blue, and wetlands occur starting approximately here.
So I mean, that wall is within how many feet of the wetlands? I mean, is it 15 feet away from the wetlands?
It's approximately 10 feet away,
Okay,
you
so
know, the way it's proposed. But I mean, we can pull that back in if need be. But the whole point that I'm trying to make is that, you know, the idea for the wall wasn't to disturb anything, it was to help. So in other words, stop letting all that water just rush down there. And there's a house a couple of doors down that has that exact same solution already installed, and it's working great. So that was the reason for it. But beyond that, do you have any other questions on the wall part?
well, you know, you say, you know, yeah, water's always going to flow downhill, but I don't see anything that's going to, it's going to be the same amount of water. I don't see it, it's going to, there's no room for it to percolate or do anything.
So behind the wall construction with anchor diamond walls, there's a section about 10 feet wide that's strictly like a clean, permeable 57 stone that's designed for when that water pressure comes, it can percolate through that and ease through the wall. So that's how that would help it in a sense. And then at the end of the wall, you know, the idea was like a rock swale or riprap, you know, to kind of slow down that force of the erosion. There was erosion prior, you know, just with that. But real quick, if I can just mention one thing, that when the homeowners had the house built at the time, you know, you can see 83% or whatever of the properties in the RPA. Somehow the house was built, the developer had that get approved. It went in, they didn't really know anything about this RPA or whatever. So they've been using pretty much where the yellow line is forward as their backyard since they've lived there for, however long they've lived in the house. So just their idea here is make it better, in other words, cut down on that. But that's on that part. Can I speak to a couple of other quick things on it, if you don't mind?
Well, I just want to add, you're saying that you're also adding 1,000 square feet of impervious surface, so you're losing all that ability
Okay,
for percolation.
okay. So driveway to the, I don't know if the pictures show it well enough, but where that addition, was added right there, that's already been approved, it's being built, there's a steep drop off that needs a retaining wall. So that's kind of what started a lot of this. Hey, we need to retain from the addition to your left over to where I'm showing the patio area. That's a retaining wall to just basically to keep the force of that water from coming down the hill. Then basically before they had a walkway that went from the driveway down to the bottom. That had to come out for the construction, so we need to get from the backyard back up to the top. So that's why the walkway is proposed. But I can understand if you're worried about the impervious surface. So one idea might be if we resubmit with permeable pavers or even gravel in that area. But that area, as y'all pointed out, it wasn't like it was trees or shrubs, or it was backyard. The pretty much everything we see, again, from the yellow line forward. So other things to just mention is to the right of the addition, and I don't know if you can tell on there, but that's the dark black line with the pillars. Where that ends, to the right of that, there's a rectangle that's proposed for pavers. That was already patio prior.
Could you use the arrow to show?
Sorry, I don't have access to it. That area was already previous, that's a step out, walk out basement. So that was already pavers. And then the pavers were showing that goes under that addition. I've been told that's really doesn't need to come to the RPA, to the Chesapeake Bay Board, because it already has construction above it. So we're just asking for that to the right of it. Is that right, Trevor? The part that's underneath? Okay. And then so that's the proposed area then is behind that black line. That would be a deck above at the height where the previous deck was, and then below that is pavers. So I know it's hard to see on here, but that's what's happening. And then you step down to your left to a paver patio from the upper deck down. And then so the reason you see steps behind the deck, that's coming from the ground level to come up and ease up to that, landing or patio area, and then up again to the driveway. It's fairly steep, so we needed to kind of break it up. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear as to what was happening there, because it's hard to see on here.
Can you show with the arrow, where was the previous deck that's already been converted over to a new room? Which area is that? Oh, okay. That was the old deck that is now, that's already got a permit for that. So we're not considering that area, okay.
And I think Mr. Potter wanted to make sure you knew that the previous deck was 4 foot further than that. So that's in with, a little bit from what the previous deck was. It was already there on the house. Sorry. Does that make sense?
Could you state that? I didn't follow.
Mr. Potter wanted to make sure you knew that where Mr. Wilson just showed the black line, that's the new addition that used to be a deck. The old deck was actually 4 feet further than that black line and represented that whole space.
Okay.
So if you look at it that way, the rectangle to the right was already there. That black line plus 4 feet more was already there. So what we're asking now is the deck beyond that and the pavers under that, and then coming over to that raised landing and then up to the driveway in this proposal. Simply get from the bottom to the top, and stop off at a little patio area with a fire pit. That's the proposal.
Sounds like to me that what we're concerned with is the erosion It's that wall that you're gonna put up, and I understand you're talking 57s putting behind it, and it would be stone all the way down. Wouldn't it make sense? You know the water's gotta go somewhere. As long as it's clean water going into the stream, you're okay. Couldn't you put a number of liters off under that wall down to the stream, which you've filtered everything, but you're letting it come in at different areas instead of coming in one area down to the stream?
Yes.
Makes sense that would, you'd lose that water over a period of areas, and it would be cleaner, and it would eliminate this pollution problem.
I agree. That could be done. In other words, you're saying several spaced out reliefs at the bottom of the wall to allow equal spread
Can't
of
stop
clean
the
water.
water from going in the stream, but we're trying to stop the mud and the debris and the erosion. And it
Yes.
looks like to me the stone would take care of that situation.
I think that's correct. Yes.
Other questions for the applicant?
I see this as pretty simple. Something's not done, eventually the house it's all going to fill into the stream. And I think my way of thinking is, what we should do is pick out the best design Mr. Waltrip has perhaps, and Mr. Rodley would have, to get a wall there. Without a wall, the wetlands are essentially going to, erosion will eventually fill them in. The wall
That was our concern.
I see
yeah.
that. If I'm looking at this wrong, point it out to me. Maybe Mr. Rodley has some ideas more so than I would have, but I don't see how we can protect the wetlands without a wall. And
That was our original thought, was to try to help and protect and hold back from sloughing off over time that had happened since they had
something
built.
with this, David,
Well,
or
What bothers me a little bit is when I went out and looked at it, man, that, it's denuded, it's eroding away. And I look at the neighbor's property and some of them, there's vegetation there. Some neighbors have natural vegetation. Some looks like maybe it was planted and it's not disturbed. And the reason we're seeing that horrible erosion, is that because of the construction that's going on? I believe that's from the construction that's going on. If this was not a disturbed slope, if they didn't clear all this area out when they started working on this house, you wouldn't see all that disturbance and that erosion going on. They brought this on themselves by doing the clearing. They should, when they started to build this, they shouldn't have cleared so far back. They should have left the slope in a natural state. It comes back to our condition, and that they're bringing it on. They're causing the problem, and now they're proposing a remedy. But this problem didn't exist before they started building this addition. That's one of the things that sort of bothers me.
After you started the construction, or before you started construction.
Planters were from the deck. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Hi, I'm Kevin Potter. I'm the owner of the property. So I will agree a little bit with what you said with the erosion. The equipment was back there, the yard was messed up, the vegetation was taken. So there's no doubt that there's a little bit of that increased erosion. But the whole backyard, all the way across from where it wasn't touched before on the left side and all the way to the right, there's always been some erosion there. Especially on the left side where we want to put the patio. I mean, that between us and the neighbors, there's a gully there, and it's just constantly there because we can't kind of keep it under control. We got to do something. So yes, there's extra dirt there and there's no grass. There's no doubt that that's creating a little extra erosion there. But it's always had problems with so much water going back there.
You were asking about the planters. I think you had said they were removed from the
Oh,
upper deck.
yeah, I was
and
going to
put
mention
down.
that too.
Sorry.
The planters in the box, that was on our deck before. We just sat that over there to get it out of the way. It's not leaning because of any erosion.
But in that area, though, I don't know if the pictures we can pull back up for that area. There were timbers that they were trying to use before to prevent that washout that was happening. I wish I had submitted, and that's my fault, I didn't submit them, but I have pictures from about a year and a half ago before anything was going on back there, and there was just a lawn back there, and there were gut outs and rut outs going down where it was just sloughing off. That's how the whole thing kind of got started, was What can we do to stop where this is washing out?
Yeah, but, I mean, there's ways of controlling erosion without putting in 1,000 square feet of impervious surface. You know, you can plant the slope and you can fill in and maybe have more of just a retaining wall, but you're adding 1,000 square feet of impervious surface. That's going to, that water's going to run, you know, a lot more water is going to be running off. Plus, you got all the water running off the new addition.
Would it help
that's
if
already been granted.
would it help if those areas were permeable? In other words, if we submitted similar design, still trying to get from point A to point B and have a little bit of enjoyment in the backyard, but use a permeable surface, would that make a difference in your mind?
That could go, you know, I think that would help the situation.
Yeah.
That's a lot of impervious surface you're adding there.
I do have a question, sorry for everybody here taking so long on this. Trevor, does that square footage you quoted, does that include what's under the addition or no? So part of that comes out because it's already impervious because of the roof above it. That number should shrink a lot because if you look at that black line, that is a huge chunk of that square footage.
Throw up the diagram so I want to make sure I understand what black line we're.
He's referring to the area here. This should not be included in the calculations. And that was an oversight, and we will recalculate that.
But that's the only reason I was bringing that up is that already has a roof above it. So that's already impervious. So if you back that out, percentage-wise, just at a glance, that's probably 40% of that number, 45%. But anyway, if all that other area was permeable, like they make permeable pavers, or even we could do gravel if that's necessary, you know, that might help. I'm just throwing out some ideas for the future, but I understand where you're coming from.
Chairman, if I can make a comment?
Yes, sure.
We've run into these situations in the past, especially on lots where there wasn't previously an RPA, and then through the passage of time and changes to the ordinance, the RPA exists. And when there are slopes in backyards, oftentimes retaining walls do serve a purpose to help minimize that ongoing erosion. I think we're all a little bit concerned with the scale of the impact, proposed impact, relative to its proximity to the jurisdictional resources. So part of what they're proposing in terms of infiltration is actually what we endorse, or what I endorse, to help treat the water before it leaves the property. Personally, I'd like an opportunity to go visit the site. So I apologize for not being able to get out there prior to this meeting, but I'll just throw that out there. If there's an opportunity to go out and visit the site, I think there's a solution here. I just want to make sure that we're all comfortable with it.
Really, that's good comments. I was, if you've been at past board meetings, you know, a lot of times I state my criteria, you know, how I think about these cases. And we're trying to protect water quality. And what I do in my mind, when I look at every case, I look at what's proposed, and if that's built, I'm trained as an environmentalist, and if I were to sample the water in the stream or the water body we're talking about before the project's built and after the project's built, would I see any difference? And one of the, you know, and yeah, a project like this, or maybe the James River, you know, that's a big body of water, and you're not going to see any impact. But we're charged not with just protecting the James River and the major tributaries, but we're also charged with protecting these little streams. And, you know, I have a place in my heart for these little streams that go through neighborhoods where the neighborhood kids can go down and catch crayfish and tadpoles and stuff. And I think it's very important to preserve them. And I'm very concerned that the project as it's proposed now is going to have an impact on that stream. I don't think it's going to protect it. And as Mr. Roadley said, we've had similar tough nuts to crack before, and we've had some good engineering solutions. I think that the amount of impervious, I'm concerned, the retaining wall idea is good if, you know, if there's a way of using that as a filter and infiltration area, but I'm still concerned about the large extent of the impervious surface. And you know, I'm not sure that every effort was made to minimize that. And we can vote tonight on the proposal as proposed. But the board, we can also allow you to request an extension and rethink this and, you know, resubmit it, a modified proposal.
Can I make one comment before we do that? So, and I think you might can do this administratively, but we're very urgent to have the little retaining wall that's there under the new addition approved because it's holding up our current project. So can we somehow get that approved administratively or something and then defer the rest? And we're okay with that if we can do, but we're holding up our project a little bit because we have some heating equipment we have to put there that wasn't originally, we didn't know we were going to have to use that spot. Is there any way we can do that? It's just a little retaining wall that's under the new construction.
Can you address that?
Mr. Chair, the retaining wall that they're talking about could be either approved tonight with the remainder of the project deferred, or we could do it administratively with the understanding that it would be approved next month or come back before the board next month.
I don't know.
We were out at the site this morning, and there is that area right by the sidewalk that had been partially removed. That's the area he's concerned with, right up by the foundation.
I don't know. We've never approved part of a project. I mean, will we just be we would be approving just part of this project and not approving the patio areas? I mean, would that require a separate application for the patio areas? It's a legal question.
Yeah, I think you're correct. What you need to do is defer the entire project, but you can instruct staff to grant, you know. Can you not hear me?
I just want to make sure that in the record reflects that you're.
Okay, you can, I would adopt or recommend that you adopt a motion to defer the entire application instead of, you know, approving part of it because they've submitted an entire application. But you can tell staff that they can grant, you know, permission to go ahead with the construction of the wall with the understanding that it's coming back before the board.
What's from the board?
Mike,
I guess I'm okay with that.
Mike, can you show the board where that wall is being built? I'm not exactly sure they're clear.
We all are sympathetic to what it's like to be in the middle of a construction project and to have a monkey wrench thrown into it, whether it's government permits or contractor problems. We don't want to cost you money or time. But, you know, we have our concerns about it. So I think, I guess I'm agreeable to letting you move ahead on the wall if that's going to act as a percolation basin, and that makes sense to me, with, provided it was, Mr. Waltrip made some comments about how it's going to be built. If it's built, you know, so that the water can filter through it.
So it's right down at the end there. The dirt is all falling down under the house because it's so slopey, and we just want a little retaining wall right there. And so if we can just get a,
That's the only wall there.
Okay, I have no problems with that. That can go ahead, but I want the other large impervious area. I would like to see that part of the project reconsidered and resubmitted.
and we request
Partial deferral.
partial deferral, then we'll come back next month with a new plan.
And then just leave the public hearing open and then make a motion to defer.
Would someone like to make a motion to defer?
I'll make a motion to defer the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0097 at 111 Cove Road. Correction, CBPA 20-0096 at 289 Millstream Way.
Before we vote on that, Mr. Rodley requested that he would like to see this site. If any other board members want to go out and see it, that's fine. We can't go out as a group, though. You would have to take us individually.
I can take up to 2.
Okay. So board members will be coming by just to take, okay, we have a motion to defer this to, and that gives you enough time. Is 1 month enough time for you to get the plans modified and, okay. All right, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, all right, we'll see you next month if we don't see you before then. Thanks for coming out. Let's see, all right, moving on to our next case, CBPA 20-0097, Cove Road.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson, Senior Watershed Planner, here to present case CBPA 20-0097, 111 Cove Road, Joseph and Catherine Dvorak. Mr. Chase Grogg, Land Tech Resources, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Joseph, Ms. Catherine Dvorak for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a carport on property located at 111 Cove Road within the College Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map number 491-024-0009. Parcel was platted in 1967 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. And the subject parcel is located here within the Kings Point subdivision. Total lot size for this property is 0.81 acres, of which 80% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to construct a 16 by 22 foot carport. The house there is a house currently under construction, and it met the requirements for an administrative approval, which was granted. Mitigation requirements for the proposed carport equate to planting of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs, in addition to the required mitigation that was placed on the administrative approval. Staff's evaluated this application and the exception request for the construction of a carport. The application does meet the ordinance requirements set in sections 2311 and 2314 and should be heard before the board because the carport is considered accessory in nature. Board may grant exceptions to sections 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. Exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. Exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Topography of the site, Cove Road is here at the bottom of this photo. A slight rise up to the buildable area of the lot, and then steep slope down to the lake. RPA as it affects this lot from the 2004 ordinance revisions and the plan that was submitted. The house that is shown here, as I stated previously, was administratively approved and is currently under construction. The carport, 16 by 24, 22-foot carport, is in this location. Couple photographs of the site. Carport would be located in this area where this pile of sand is. Looking from the carport to the new construction, and from the top of the slope back towards the carport. Staff's view of this application is it does meet all 5 of the conditions as presented. Should the board also find that the exception request meet all 5 conditions, staff suggests the following be incorporated into that approval. The applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. Mitigation plan equating to the planting of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater Resource Protection Division. A surety of $250 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work on the carport in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. This exception request shall become null and void should work not begin by October 14, 2021, and that any written request for extension be submitted to our office no later than September 2nd, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions regarding this request.
Okay, looks like no questions from the board. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
I'm here with my wife Catherine and our builder Jonathan Beamer. I'd like to thank the staff for their work and thank the board for hearing us tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Chairman,
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was just gonna comment, it looks like you have some very sandy soil on your lot.
So I think that pile of sand was what was left over from the foundation work. Yep.
this may seem like a stupid question, but I noticed you have a garage on your house.
Yes.
Um,
Why the carport?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a fair question, I think. It's simply put, it's for extra covered parking. On site, we would have probably submitted that with the original house plan, but really weren't inspired to do it until we saw the construction of the house starting to progress and got familiar with the lot. So it now becomes, for us, it's the most efficient time to do it rather than wait and do it later. Good question. We want to ask the same question.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you again.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board? Really routine. Any problems with it? Someone like to make a motion?
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the board vote to approve CUB 200097, 111 Cove Road.
Mr. Ridley?
yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
The exception is granted. Thanks for coming out tonight. Okay, we're up to our final case, 20 Marclay Road, retaining wall and revetments. Mr. Wilson.
Please let the record show that Mr. Waltrip has recused himself from this public hearing.
Actually left the room as well. Okay,
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson here to present case CBPA 20-0090, 20 Marclay Road. Mr. Danny Winall has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Larry Waltrip for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a retaining wall and 2 revetments on property located at 20 Marclay Road within the College Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map 48201-00012. Property is further identified, parcel was platted in 1971 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Again, the request is for the construction of 2 revetments and a retaining wall. Subject parcel located on College Creek, outlined in blue, and specifically the location of the revetments will be here. Aerial photograph, topography of the site. Currently, there's a boat ramp and floating dock and pier. Gravel parking lot, boat ramp is here, and then there is a access path that had been previously cut into the hillside at some point in the past. This project also came before the Wetlands Board at the September meeting for improvements on this side of the boat ramp, which the Wetlands Board approved. RPA as it affects the property, and from the application. Chesapeake Bay exception is associated with the wetlands permit 20 WJPA 20-0023 for a wharf and a retaining wall area. Total lot size for the property is 29.36 acres, of which 32% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to construct one 200-foot linear south revetment and add to an existing, the south revetment would be here, add to an existing 200-foot long north revetment as a form of shoreline protection and stabilization. Additionally, there is a 25-foot long retaining wall proposed adjacent to the boat ramp, and that is here. Required amount of mitigation for the impervious impacts equate to the planting of 4 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 12 shrubs. Staff's evaluated this application and the exception request for the construction of the 2 revetments and a retaining wall. The application meets the ordinance conditions outlined in sections 2311 and 2314 and should be heard by the board because the proposed construction activities are located within the seaward 50-foot and the retaining wall is considered an accessory structure. The proposed revetments, the proposed retaining wall. The north revetment cross-section, to refresh memory from last month, there is existing concrete rubble on the shoreline, and it extends approximately up to mean high water. The proposal is to add on above mean high water the revetment in this area. Parking lot that we saw in the aerial photograph is off here to the left. For the south revetment, the proposal is to, and Mr. Gussman, I apologize, I misspoke to you earlier when we were on site. The proposal is to excavate back from mean high water and install a revetment in this area up to an elevation of 5 feet. And then adjacent to the gravel, adjacent to the boat ramp, these two structures were approved by the Wetlands Board at the September meeting. This retaining wall will be, has to come before the board because it's considered accessory and it's in the uplands. In one of the site photographs you'll see here in a minute, there is wetland vegetation here. The idea was to, from last month, was not to put a revetment in here to stabilize this part because there would be vegetated wetland impacts. And if I may, I'm going to go back to the site plan. The reason the revetment's not extended all the way up is because when you're putting in boats on a boat ramp, they don't necessarily go where you want them to do, where you want them to go. And if that boat hits the wooden structure, it's not going to damage the boat. However, if it were to crash up against a stone revetment, it might damage the boat. So that's why there's two different treatments in that area, the retaining wall and then the stone revetment. Site photographs. The concrete rubble, can't see it because it's vegetated here. But the proposal is to start at the top of that, excavate back 2 feet and add stone on top of the concrete rubble to stabilize this part. Boat ramp in this photograph is off to the left. This is where the retaining wall would be, this location. There are vegetated wetlands down there. We can see them in this picture here. And then the revetment starts here and continues further south for 200 feet. Down to this dead tree that's lying in the water. So, staff's view of this application is that it does meet the conditions as presented earlier. Should the board find that the exception request meets all of those conditions, staff suggests these conditions be incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary local, state, and federal permits as required for the project. That all development activities located in the special flood hazard area comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to construction of such activities. That a mitigation plan of 4 canopy trees, 8 understory trees, and 12 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division, or a payment into the Chesapeake Mitigation Fund of $2,000. That a surety of $2,000 be paid in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the county attorney's office if the planting mitigation option is chosen. That the exception request approval shall become null and void should construction not begin by October 14, 2021, and that any written request for extension be submitted no later than September 2nd, 2021, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. I'll be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Chairman, Mr. Wilson, can you go back to the plan view? This, I'll call it the southern revetment. What is the purpose of that?
The site photographs don't show it well, but the bank there is vertical and it is slightly undercut. Mr. Long and I did see that when we were on our site visit about 8 weeks ago in preparation for the September's Wetlands Board meeting. Unfortunately, neither one of us got a picture of it. So the bank is eroding, although there is mature vegetation on that.
So are they going to be able to go in and hand place that stone, or are they going to have to clear to place it?
Excellent question. The bank, the top of the bank has woody vegetation on it. That woody vegetation would have to be, some of it removed and some of it just pruned back. Former access road that I described has been somewhat overgrown over the years, and that part would have to be cleared out.
And then the northern revetment is it dressing for the top of that existing structure to help create a stable edge, or is there erosion occurring there as well?
There is slight erosion there. If you remember from the September Wetlands Board meeting, their original proposal was to top dress or overlay the concrete rubble, and the MRC had issues with that. They were not going to favorably upon permitting that, so the proposal changed slightly to go above the wetland limit at the top of the concrete rubble, and then, as you said, basically top dress it or add a top cap to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is voting though, of the part that Mr. Rowley was talking about, being undercut?
The southern part, it is, sir.
Revetment's going to go.
The revetment location is going to be landward of the undercut, and all the, for lack of a better term, overburden would be removed. Currently, there are mature trees in this area of on the existing bank that would have to be removed. 6 to 8 inch diameter, Mr. Gusman, I would estimate, and some wax myrtle. Don't have a exact.
Giant devil's walking
Oh,
sticks.
and devil's walking stick.
I saw one of those in your slides, one of the biggest ones I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, that one got me this morning.
It's healthy. Yeah, I forgot to warn Mr. Gusman.
He won't need a warning again.
I never saw one that big.
Also, something that was unique that we did see on the site on the excavated bench was an area of about 100 square feet of horsetail, which is a facultative wet type plant. Mr. Waltrip hired Mr. Matthew Roth of Roth Environmental to do a delineation on the entire site, and that part of the project was not deemed wetlands due to other factors, and the Corps did agree to that, and there is a confirmed wetland line on this property. Those documents made it late into the board package. Find them. They're in the board package now, but they weren't there last Friday, and I do apologize for that.
I want to make a a comment now before we open the public hearing, just about the whole procedure for this, since, you know, this is obviously a controversial case. This is one of the, we've had cases before like this that involved a wetlands permit and a Chesapeake Bay permit. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the past, when we've had cases like this, didn't we actually open up both board meetings for, we opened up both board meetings and we considered the whole project as one?
Both applications were taken to the same meeting.
Right, at the same meeting.
Correct.
But I think we actually opened up the Chesapeake Bay meeting while the wetlands.
We may have done that in one or two cases. It hasn't been in recent years, but
Okay.
some projects get really complicated.
I remember one on the Chickahominy where, the two projects are really interlinked. So last month, we signed off on this project, but we did not on the wetlands part of this project. And by signing off on that, this is intricate, this is part of that project, except it doesn't, it falls under the jurisdiction of the Chesapeake Bay. It would have really been good if we can consider this all at one meeting, so it's really clear we're signing, it's one project. It just falls into, we're dividing it up into under two laws. But, in a way, when we said, okay, if we said okay to the other part of it, it's almost like we almost have to say okay to this. Well,
Mr. Gussman,
it just doesn't make logical sense to.
Just from a regulatory standpoint, I don't believe one portrays the other. So I don't think foretells the other. So I think we have an obligation to consider this on its merits under the Chesapeake Bay Act and vote accordingly.
Okay. All right. It would have been nice to consider them both at the same meeting, but it didn't happen that way. In the future, I hope we can always, if we have a case like this, we can all look at the whole thing at one meeting. All right. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Let's see. I see we got two comments. They go into the record, right? Yes, sir. So we have a comment from David Stanhope and also one from Denise Koch. We don't need to read them into the record, but they'll be part of the official record. Okay. Is there a representative of the applicant who'd like to speak at this time? Okay, then I'll open up the public hearing. Okay. State your name for the record and let's hear your comments.
John Milliman is my name. I am a neighbor across the water. I might also mention I'm an oceanographer, and I worked at FIMS, and before that I worked at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. My specialty is in rivers and estuaries, for which I've written over 200 papers. I'm not bragging, I'm just letting you know that I'm speaking with a little bit of acquired intuition. Actually, Mr. Gussman, I completely concur with you. This project ought to be read or ought to be looked at as a holistic, because what you've got, you have an estuary that really goes from the deepest water up onto land, and to look at it incrementally actually wastes. It doesn't waste, but I think it can be awfully myopic. For example, and I'm only going to use one example, putting the piers offshore like they are going to do, the floating docks, will inevitably alter the circulation, much like the building of the 199 bridge altered the circulation. And you'll hear other neighbors talk about the fact that much of of that part of the creek is silting in now. So you've got your shore, which is eroding, the other side is silting in. What the new structures, the proposed ones, will do, quite honestly, I don't know. But my suspicion is that the erosion on Mr. Waltrip's shore probably will increase. That's, and this really ought to be looked at much, much more than it has been. Secondly, as I understand it, there will be some wetland that will actually be removed, excavated. Where does it go? Where do you put your spoil? There'll be a lot of it. Where do you put it? And are you really, is it within your purview to be able to allow actual wetlands to be removed, particularly on an area that isn't really going to be used as a pier? The southern part of that retaining wall, it doesn't serve the purpose of Mr. Waltrip's marina. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I think you raised some excellent questions, and they need to be addressed. But I think those are questions that are better put to the VMRC, where those, because they're the regulatory agency that has to address that. Right tonight, all we're considering is if this berm and this wooden wall is that going to affect water quality? And that's the narrow question we have to focus on tonight. We have to follow the legal guidelines that we operate under. Thank you for your thoughtful comments. Okay, who else would like to speak on this issue? Please come forward.
Mr. Guzman, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. My name is William J. Schneider. I reside at 135 Kings Point Drive, Williamsburg, Virginia, in the county of James City County. I have lived here for 31 years. With regard to Mr. Waltrip's proposal, I object to his request for installing the retaining wall and revetments in the Chesapeake Bay Resource Protection Area. And there are many people like Mr. Waltrip and myself included that would like to construct freely on their property without any interference from regulatory agencies. There are things that are for the betterment of society as a whole that are inviolate. And the resource protection area, as part of the Chesapeake Bay Act, is one of those areas. From my own personal experience, when I wanted to construct the shed, I had to find an area that was outside of the RPA. I probably could have done it within the RPA, which would have brought it up to your review. But once I found an area that was outside of the RPA, not necessarily where I wanted it, I was able to construct my shed. And I feel that Mr. Waltrip should follow the same rules that anybody else would follow in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that he should also find an area outside of the RPA to do what he wants to do. Accordingly, as a citizen of Virginia, I object to his proposal and retaining wall and a revetment within the Chesapeake Bay Resource Protection Area. And there is one exception, and that is in the case of the two walls that he wanted to build. If it's within, if it was constructed originally prior to the enactment of the Chesapeake Bay Act, then he should be allowed, may be allowed, with your permission, to be able to construct his walls. If it's not on the same footprint, then I don't think he has any choice other than to approach you for some allowance to him to work. In addition to that, I would like to make one other comment. And that is approximately 10 years ago, Mr. Waltrip, his agent, installed that concrete that Mr. Wilson showed you. Now that was after the enactment of the Chesapeake Bay Act. And what bothers me is when I asked Mr. Wilson, why was I, as a neighbor across the way, why was I not informed that this was going to be the case? And I never did get an answer. However, other members of Kings Point community approached Mr. Wilson, and I found out that Mr. Waltrip never ever asked for permission to install that concrete as a revetment in that area. So now, actually, I gave you 4 pieces of paper. And of the 4 pieces of paper, the third piece is the Chesapeake Bay Act. Now, I don't really feel like I should be showing you anything about the Chesapeake Bay Act because you're all experts, but just humor me. The act was enacted in 1988. Now, I moved into that house in 1989, so all of the time that I have been in my house, it has been part of the Chesapeake Bay Act. And the Department of Environmental Quality is the administrating authority for the state. And there are 2 types of regulations. There's the RPA, and there's also the RMA. And the RPA tries to correct for water quality. And the RMA can also improve water quality. Now, there is one thing that is probably the most important thing that I want to make known to you, and that is the Submerged Land Act. Unlawful for a person to build on, dump into, or encroach upon the beds of bays, oceans, streams, and creeks that are the property of the Commonwealth of Virginia, unless first obtained a permit from the VRMC, Article 11, Section 3 of the Constitution of Virginia. Mr. Waltrip, in my opinion, violated the Submerged Land Act if he did not have permission to dump the concrete into the College Creek along the shoreline of his property. Now, I'm also a little bit concerned. I think we looked into, or at least Mr. Wilson looked into it, but if in the event that he did have permission, then I have no standing here. However, if he did not ask permission for this action for his agent, then I would hope that you would be amenable to having that concrete removed and a living shoreline put in. Because if you look on this, actually, this is not the one I'm looking for. Perhaps maybe you could adjust the one where it shows the riprap. Well, either the north or the south revetment is fine. But at any rate, the north one shows the concrete there. And it was dumped. And actually, the fourth picture that I gave you is the machine that they use. It was a little different color, but it gives you the impression of what was done. He brought in a raft and relocated that front end loader onto the raft and then picked up the concrete and dropped it into the water. And I saw that. Now, what I would like to point out is the top of this revetment now, what he's proposing is leave the concrete where it is, but then he's going to use one of those front-end loaders, which I'm sure Mr. Milliman or Dr. Milliman, I'm glad that he's not here because all he could see is the complete inundation of the top of the parking lot of Mr. Waltrip's area being pushed into the creek, and on top of that, because it's very difficult to be able to pick up with a front end loader and scrape up and then place rocks in position. And I think it will become an environmental disaster. So I think maybe you might want to look at that situation because it certainly bothers me. And in fact, I don't even understand why there's not even an environmental protection review of something like this, because I think this could be catastrophic to the stream. Now, I don't have the background of Dr. Milliman, but I do have a degree in environmental science from a major university in New York. But I've not really worked in that area because I was working as an engineer. But I have not done that. But at any rate, I think it could be easily an environmental disaster for what they want to do. And I think more importantly, if there is no record of Mr. Waltrip having permission to do the work that he had done some 10 years ago, then I think that this whole thing should be just thrown out. Because this is really a contravention to the entire Chesapeake Bay Act. Thank you very much, sir. Any questions?
What year did you say the concrete was thrown in there? What year did you believe the concrete was placed in there along in the marsh?
What I saw was he brought in a barge. He moved the front end loader, or the device the picture that I gave you, on top of the barge. Then he picked up the concrete, and it was dropped all along sort of where the north riprap is. and I watched it happening.
Yeah, but what year? What year?
As I say, it's about 10, 15 years ago. I've been there for 31 years, so it was about half the time. I don't really have a record. I could probably find out, but my wife, who probably would have remembered the date and time, is no longer here. So I'd have to telegraph to heaven.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Any other questions? Thanks. Okay, who would like to speak next?
To last time. My name is Chapman, Mary Louise Chapman, and I live in Kings Point. I live about 2 blocks from the creek, and I walk down there every day. The thing about this is you can tell him he can build his walls and so on, but now you're encouraging him. If you do that, you are so right. This is one big project. This is not consideration of a wall or two. This project is ruination for the creek. It would be a huge marina, and that's what we're really talking about. And that's the elephant in the room. Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
My name is Carolyn Immel. My husband, Bill, and myself have lived in Kings Point on College Creek for the past 20 years. We believe the proposed Waltrip Marina will have detrimental effects on College Creek. We do not understand why a 9+ boat marina is being considered on a creek. College Creek is a creek. It's not a river. It's a narrow creek. The existing docks on the creek are residential docks that house 1 to 2 boats, and the homeowners live on the creek. We believe the proposed extensive construction and dredging for the marina will be harmful to the creek. College Creek is a healthy, viable, sustainable creek, and I can't even imagine to understand the negative effects of all the dredging. Where is this mud and silt going to go? What's going to happen to the wetlands in Port Anne? Will people still be able to canoe or kayak from the College Landing Park? Or will those wetlands disappear as they are filling in? Will the silt and mud and from the dredging affect the existing Kings Point boat ramp? And how will the dredging affect where College Creek and Halfway Creek intersect? And that's where I live. Will the Route 199 bridge structure be affected by all this mud and silt? The proposed marina will increase the boat traffic, which will only increase shoreline erosion, and we have witnessed this for the past 20 years. Every wake takes a little bit more of our shoreline. With the additional of the 9+ motorboats and all the other marine guests and their traffic, I fear for the people who use the creek for kayaking and canoeing, and we do have a large population that use that. We do understand that people want to be on the water and enjoy the water. I get that. And we have no objections to Mr. Waltrip building a dock, perhaps that can house 1 or 2 boats. But 9+, that's too big. That's too much for this small creek. We have had the honor for the past 20 years of watching the eagle population come back to College Creek. We've watched the ospreys and the herons and the egrets just flourish on College Creek, as well as other numerous wildlife species. And my husband and I, as well as many other Kings Point residents, we fear that the marina, or the proposed marina, will have devastating effects on College Creek, on the James River, Halfway Creek, and also on the Williamsburg community. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for coming out. Hey, next.
I'll try to be brief. My name is Danny Schmidt. I live at 218 South Point Drive in the Kings Point subdivision. I just came off of a service of 4 years on the Planning Commission, so I know what it's like to make some of these tough decisions. And I appreciate you guys doing your civic duty with the county here. So I'm just going to stick to the southern 200-foot portion. I've spent 40 plus years on college. Grew up on College Creek, and that 200-foot section is a good section of pretty heavy woodlands. You have a lot of vegetation there. It's sort of emblematic of most of what you see along the creek. It doesn't naturally erode very fast there because there's not heavy boat traffic. There's not a large fetch of open water to get the wave action going. So that's a very, very slow process undergoing there. And I would hate to see us lose that vegetation there. William and Mary has studied, because of their proximity to the creek, has studied this creek's water quality for many years. I'm sure VIMS has as well. And it ranks as one of the top in our area because there is so much vegetation along the banks of the creek. Now, we just had a case here tonight, and that I watched you deliberate with the Mill Creek watershed there. And that was a case where a house was potentially being undermined due to erosion. This 200, and you've deferred it, which I think rightly so. I mean, that needs a little bit more thought. But this is a section of 200 feet where there's not an existing house up above. This is just the natural slope. So I really do find that 200-foot section to be unnecessary, and I think you should take a good hard look at that tonight. Thank you very much.
For your comments. Anyone else like to speak? Okay. You can go on the record. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we also had 4 call-in comments that I'd like to play for the record.
Okay, yes.
Assuming nobody in the audience wants to speak.
Okay, can I just ask our attorney I don't remember, have we ever accepted call-in comments?
We are now, because of the current pandemic. You don't have to play them, but they can be part of the record, same as the emails. Okay, then go ahead and play them. If we told them that we would.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Scott Lerberg at 212 South Point Drive, Williamsburg, Virginia, 231. Hi, my name is Scott Lerberg, Point neighborhood at 212 South Point Drive, Williamsburg, Virginia, 23185. I'm calling in reference to the hearing tonight for the Waltrips Landing project, JPA number 20-1053. I would like to voice opposition to this proposed project for a number of reasons, and I have already submitted a letter that was part of the record, I believe, for the portion of the hearing that went to the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, and hopefully was also copied to the James City County Wetlands Board. But for this particular hearing tonight, my 2 major concerns are, first, that the amount of bulkheading and hardening of the shoreline in such a quiescent and low fetch setting just seems out of character for what would be necessary, which would obviously be a living shorelines approach, which is shown to have not only be a way to protect the shorelines in these settings, but also to actually have benefits to the environment when done correctly. And I believe there's been much guidance from multiple institutions, including the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, on wetlands, on living shoreline approaches. And my second point would be that we should do everything we can to protect our resource protection areas. And this project appears to have a major impact in that area, especially in such a beautiful and relatively unaltered system up at College Creek. So those are my 2 points for opposition to this proposed project. And I Thank you very much for taking them under consideration, and I know you'll do your best tonight.
My name is Ronald Nervett. My wife Lois and I live at 108. Hello, my name is Eric McDonald. My address is 127 Kings Point Drive. I'm opposed to the marina expansion proposal for College Creek. If approved, it would lead to the further destruction of the delicate College Creek ecosystem. The development would also increase the levels of water, air, and noise pollution in the vicinity. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Hello, my name is Tracy Sahoni, and my husband and I live at 106 Cove Road in Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm calling regarding Larry Waltrip's marina project proposal. I hope that you will reject the application for this project. We need to protect our wetlands. This is a beautiful area that many animals call home. We need to protect this area, and the research that is available by scientists at esteemed institutions like the Virginia Institute of Marine Science have established the importance of a living shoreline that simply cannot be replaced by artificial means. There's a reason this is a resource protection area, and clearly building a new marina is not only unnecessary, but greatly undercuts the purpose behind having a resource protection area. So I deeply hope that you will reject this application. Thank you so much for your time and consideration on this matter.
My name is Elizabeth McCoy of 105 Wake Robin Road in James City County. Gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to speak in opposition to Mr. Waltrip's application, number 20-1053, submitted by Shortneck LLC to further harden the shoreline of College Creek and to build a retaining wall in the resource protection area along the creek across from the Kings Point neighborhood and in view of traffic on the Route 199 bridge. This project has two stated objectives: first, to protect the shoreline, and second, to provide access to the creek. Although the proposed construction of docks, decks, and a boathouse over the creek doesn't fall within the jurisdiction of this body, its construction depends on this board's approval and the proposed hardened revetment as its foundation. There is no stated or implied public good to this project. The applicant stated it is for his personal use. My opposition to this project can be summarized in the words of President Theodore Roosevelt, who spoke to this issue 100 years ago when he said, "Our duty to the whole, including the unborn generations, bids us to restrain an unprincipled present-day minority from wasting the heritage of these unborn generations. The movement for the conservation of wildlife and the larger movement for the conservation of all our natural resources are essentially democratic in spirit, purpose, and method." There's photographic evidence that prior to the Virginia Wetlands Act of 1972, Mr. Waltrip already had access to College Creek at this site. Since that time, the area of the current revetment, dock, and parking area was declared a resource protection area. Virginia conservation and wetland law has evolved. Virginia's Code 28.2-104.1 states, "It is the policy of the common law to support living shorelines as the preferred alternative for stabilizing tidal shorelines. The Commission shall permit only living shorelines approaches to shoreline management unless the best available science shows that such approaches are not suitable. College Creek is a fragile tidal waterway, a habitat for thousands of species of animals and plants. Much of this native vegetation and habitat within the RPA on this property has already been stripped away. It is a rare, bare eyesore along an otherwise beautiful and ecologically rich stretch of historic waterway. College Creek, known as Archer's Hope Creek, brought early colonists inland from Jamestown to their next settlement at Middle Plantation. It was the gateway of the first successful group of English colonists to our continent. Their watercraft navigated the creek right past this site on the bank. I invite this board to restore and preserve this national treasure and vast natural resource rather than rubber stamping this latest proposal to forever change College Creek. President Roosevelt further advised, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. We are in historic James City County. We have the law on the side of conservation, our Virginia's and our own county citizens' shared natural resources. What we now need are those citizens appointed to the applicable boards to have the integrity to use these laws for their stated purposes. Code of Virginia 28.2-1302 in Section 9 states, in fulfilling its responsibilities under this ordinance, the board shall preserve and prevent the despoilation and destruction of wetlands within its jurisdiction. The Code of Virginia 28.2-1301 in Section D states, consideration shall be given to the unique character of the Commonwealth tidal wetlands, which are essential for the production of marine and inland wildlife and flora, serve as a valuable protective barrier against floods, tidal storms, and the erosion of the shores and soil, and are important for recreational and aesthetic enjoyment of the people. These purposes: 1, preservation of the unique historical character of College Creek; 2, restoration and preservation of a living shoreline planted with appropriate native species to protect the soil, absorb the silt and pollutants, and provide habitat for wildlife; and 3, preservation of College Creek for recreation and enjoyment by the entire community, are what I am asking members of this board to uphold. Please meet your responsibility to uphold our Commonwealth's legacy of environmental protections under the law. In the years since these wetland laws have been enforced, historic photos and eyewitness accounts demonstrate that work has been done on this site within the RPA to remove vegetation and further harden the shoreline, with broken concrete dumped on the water's edge. If it is determined that the current revetment materials weren't installed on permit and under the supervision of appropriate county staff, then the members of this board should reject the proposal before you and instead issue a restoration order per Virginia law. In closing, President Roosevelt's words: "Here is your country. Cherish your natural wonders. Cherish the history and romance as a sacred heritage for your children and your children's children. Do not let selfish men or greedy interests skin your country of its beauty."
At the last of the comments.
There we go. Yes, sir. I did tell Ms. McCoy, because she called and voiced her concern that the entire message wasn't read. And so I told her I'd finish out her quote. And it said, "Do not let selfish men or greedy interests skin your country of its beauty, its riches, or its romance." So, but yes, that is the end of the phone-in comments.
All right. Anybody else? All right, at this time, I'm closing the public hearing and opening it up for discussion among the board.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Some comments were entered into the record this evening about potential illegal activity along the shoreline in contravention of the laws that exist or regulations. Mr. Wilson, can you comment on that?
I'd be happy to Mr. Roadley. Ms. McCoy alerted me to this 6 to 8 weeks ago, prior to the Wetlands Board hearing, that some work had been done there approximately 10 to 15 years ago, as Mr. Schneider stated. While there is no wetland permit in county records for that work, it was an overlay of the concrete that had been placed previously. County historic aerial photographs do show a revetment in that area since the 1970s. So while I can't comment on the work that was done within the last 10 or 15 years, historically there was a revetment, and I'm only referring to the area adjacent to the existing gravel parking lot, what's called the North Revetment. Historically, there was a revetment in that area.
Thank you.
A lot of very valid comments were made by various speakers tonight, and the board shares a lot of your concerns. But I want to repeat something that was said by the chairman at the last board meeting. Your comments are coming to the wrong group, the wrong board. We're considering a very narrow issue tonight. You need to direct your comments to the VMRC. And I don't know, have they scheduled a hearing yet on this?
No, Mr. Chair. To my knowledge, no hearing at the VMRC has been set yet for this case.
The representative of the VMRC last month indicated there would in all likelihood be a VMRC hearing on this case. Your concerns need to be addressed to the VMRC. We have a very narrow focus that we're considering tonight. We're looking at some riprap and some and a small section of wooden bulkhead that's not being placed in the marshes or in the wetlands. It's being placed in the uplands, and we're asked. We have to answer the question: is that going to impact the water quality in the creek? That's the only issue we can address. Not the entire project. That falls to the VMRC. So we're only looking at a very narrow issue tonight, and that's what, by law, that's all we can consider. Not the destruction of wetlands, the appropriateness of the marina, the size of the marina, the effects on boating traffic and kayaking.
Mr. Chairman, a point of clarification. The term marina has been used this evening, and it was my understanding that this was a private pier for Mr. Waltrip's private use, or is this in fact a marina, Mr. Wilson?
It is a private facility. Mr. Waltrip has provided boat registration and that type of information to the VMRC for family members that would be permitted to use dock. There were 9 boats. It was, if my memory is correct, it was 6 family members, but it might have been 7, but there was 9 boats in total.
Has VMRC ruled, to your knowledge, and whether they're considering this a private or commercial pier?
My understanding with discussions with Mr. Madden was that it was private and not a commercial enterprise.
I think the point I'm getting at is, once it becomes commercial, then we do have jurisdiction over it, and then all of the comments that are made tonight do weigh on this board.
That would be correct.
Pier.
As stated last month in last month's hearing, the zoning administrator had concerns over the quasi-commercial nature and requested that Mr. Waltrip submit a statement stating that it would be private and remain in private control and not turn into a commercial enterprise, which he has done so.
Private use, though, I don't think ameliorates the concerns of the citizens here tonight.
No.
Wait, we've closed the public hearing. Can I allow?
You may reopen it.
Okay. No, wait, you got, all right, I'm going to reopen the public hearing and allow additional comment. And you can take the mask off while you speak. And restate your name.
I'm Carolyn Emmel, and I live on College Creek. I don't know for sure if this is a private marina. I do know that I've lived on College Creek. The Waltrip family, and I guess this has been very generous of them, but they have allowed an honor system. They allow people to come over and park and put their boats in. And we have seen in the past many years an increase in boat traffic. I know this because my husband goes out on the boat every day, and in the summertime he hangs out on the sandbar and he talks to people and just kind of ask, where did you put your boat in, that kind of thing. And hey, we put our boat in at the Waltrips. All you have to do is just stick a little bit of money in the mailbox and you can use it, which, whatever. But I know that, and perhaps Mr. Waltrip really does mean that it's going to be for his family. But there are a lot of people who use that ramp that do not live on the Waltrip property, or nor do they live in Kings. So that's all I just.
Dan, thank you. And some of that was brought out at the previous meeting, so.
I'm closing the public hearing again. Oh, come on up.
I just want to speak to just what your preview is. My understanding is that the rock will be placed above mean high water. So really it provides no protection or stabilization of the shoreline if it's above mean high water. So really there's not much point in putting out 500 feet of rock. There's no erosion there above the water line, and it's on a very flat area where there's very little slope and runoff. So I'm not really sure what the purpose of putting in all this rock would do.
Okay, public hearing, back to the board. Other comments from the board?
I'm actually having a hard time with the southern revetment as well. It's being undercut at the bank, and they're putting stone above it. Charlie, maybe you could help me understand.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I share your concern for the southern portion in that there might need to be more clearing to help then, in fact, stabilize. So you end up removing more vegetation to help reduce the erosion, which may occur during a high water event. And that's, sometimes scarps get attacked during those high water events. So it's not exactly clear to me, and Mike, you feel free if you have additional information to share on that southern portion of the property in terms of need, or Mr. Chairman. I did note that it looked like Class 1 riprap, so it's fairly small stone.
It was small stone. First, I want to apologize to the board for not bringing this last month, but it's a function of the new guidance in state law for living shorelines. It never crossed my mind that this part last month should have come to the Chesapeake Bay Board. So I do apologize to the board for the messiness of the back-to-back public hearings on this case. To your question, Mr. Roadley, the stone is small. It's Class 1, 50 to 75 pound stones, approximately 12 inches or so in diameter. While it could be hand placed, there's going to have to be excavation, so there's no reason to place it by hand either. To not go to mean low water on the landward side might cause problems in the future from continued erosion, as Mr. Stanhope just pointed out. The current structure could get undermined because to build a revetment correctly and to do it correctly as the original proposal would be to go out into the creek some slight distance and dig a toe below mean low water so the structure doesn't get undermined. Could this structure be revised and built in that manner? It could be, but there'd be even more clearing and grading than is proposed, and it would all be in the RPA. There is no good compromise in this area, in my opinion. It should have been, in my opinion, the proper thing to do would have been to have it in the wetland jurisdiction and built correctly, as opposed to into the Chesapeake Bay jurisdiction and proposed as such.
Thank you.
Any more comments?
I'm in a difficult spot on this one.
In the South, if it was going to do what he originally wanted to do, it's going to have to do a. That's how I'm
Well,
seeing it right now.
the problem, and we're stepping out of Ches Bay into the wetlands, but I think my understanding is the problem with the living shoreline in this location was perhaps the closeness of the channel to the edge as well as the depth. But I could be mistaken if that was part of the issue.
That was part of the issue, Mr. Oatley. The channel, this is an outer bend, so the bow wig of the channel comes close to this side of the creek. To do a living shoreline strictly as the law states, would have filled in part of the navigable channel, further reducing boating access upstream. And in staff's opinion, that was not feasible. That was not a feasible solution.
Can't put off our decision until after the VMRC decides, can we? We have to act on it now, right?
This part of the project is outside of VMRC jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So regardless of how they rule, this is a separate issue.
Public hearing is closed now. I don't know, if we look at this in the narrow confines of the Chesapeake Bay Act, which is what we have to do by law, we got to look at this, putting in this riprap in uplands. Is that going to have any impact on water quality? Is that going to affect the runoff or the quality of the water? It's not a lot of impervious area. I don't see how that's going to have it. The rock itself isn't going to contribute to the pollutants. I don't see it's.
But why do it? Why do it at all on the southern revetment then? Why not just? And stuff, and you're.
And the point was made earlier that when erosion is occurring and you're trying to protect existing structures and resources, then we obviously evaluate that with the intent of helping to reduce the erosion, reduce the sediment input into the waterway, but also in some regards protecting structures. There are no structures here per se, but we are still trying to minimize sedimentation in the waterway. Which carries nitrogen and phosphorus bound to the sediment. So to the extent that there is an erosion problem or there is erosion occurring, then there may be some benefit associated with stabilizing that. There just doesn't happen to be a structure that we're protecting in this instance.
Everybody's thought this thoroughly, as deeply, scientifically as I can, not being an engineer. Foresters don't know commitments, but back to the fact that the erosion, essentially what we're all talking about is stopping the erosion. What we are charged by the General Assembly to do. This is your instructions. This is why you're here. Guidelines that we've right. look at is what we've, that's what I'm basing.
That wave, I think, was an indication to make sure, speak in the
I'm
mic.
sorry, I did not mean to turn to speak to you away from the mic. That wasn't intentional.
Did you pick?
I'm sorry.
I did the same.
I didn't mean to do.
Did you? I'm going to make sure Mr. Apperson's comments are in the record.
I can repeat it.
It might be good, Mr. Apperson, if you would just make sure that the red light is on your microphone when
It's
you're
working.
speaking.
I just turned away from it.
Okay.
And I was
Yeah.
unconsciously.
Could you summarize that into the mic so the audience can hear?
Absolutely. I have listened intently to everybody's comment tonight and tried to make a decision in my own mind about this situation. And I agree with Mr. Gussman's comment that the only thing that I'm thinking about, we should be thinking about, is our charge from the General Assembly, the guidelines that we've given and what we're supposed to make decisions on. Erosion is taking place. The revetment will not detrimentally impact water quality. And that's my position, the way I look at it. I sincerely feel for your coming here and making your comments and giving your positions to be known. I'm also of the opinion that this should go to the VMRC. It's not this board's position here to make our decisions based on what the public opinion of the project is, as I understand it. And that's exactly where I'm coming from. I think we've been given a charge by the General Assembly. We are to stay within those guidelines and perform as we've been instructed by the legislature. That's what I had to say before, and I think I've repeated that almost verbatim.
Thank you. Okay, you're on the record now. Any other board members' comments? Somebody want to make a motion?
I will. Get my notes again, please. I move that the board vote to adopt CBA 20-009 20 Markley Road retaining wall and revestments.
Okay. I want to read it, what I believe is Mr. Apperson's motion. He made a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for the Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA-20-0090 at 20 Markley Road. That's your motion.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, we have a motion. Ms. Parman, can you call the roll?
Mr. Roadley?
No.
Mr. Waltrip has recused himself. Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
No.
All right, 2-2. And
In order for a motion to pass, it does need 3 affirmative votes, so the motion failed.
all right. The motion, okay, so we have not granted an exception for this case. All right. That concludes our public hearings for tonight. Are there any matters of board consideration? I don't believe so. I don't believe we have any matters of special privilege. Can I have?
All right, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to remind the board for the November meeting, normally scheduled November 11th, which is Veterans Day. It is a holiday. The board meeting will be held on Thursday, November 12th next month.
Okay, thank you. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
The move.
We are adjourned.